Hey, it's James Tuckerman here, and I have a question for you. What's the single most influential thing that stops new ventures getting off the ground? Is it access to capital? Is it lack of management experience? Is it access to the right technical resources? Well, actually, it's none of these things. It's fear. Fear of failure. That's right, the world is filled with people who are gonna one day launch their new winning idea, and it's filled with businesses that should have ditched their existing model in favour of something more contemporary. They were gonna do it, but they never did, because of fear, which triggers all those excuses, such as lack of capital or contacts or skills. So if that makes sense to you, if these words struck a chord, I have some very good news. Because sitting next to me right now is Dan Mumme, who you might know as the startup guy. He's a father of 4. He's spent 20 years in corporate life before catching the entrepreneurship bug in 1996. His first venture as an entrepreneur now makes 10 million in profit a year. He's launched 15 startups across e-commerce, hospitality, social networking and not-for-profit. And he joins us today to share his wisdom as the CEO and founder of the Startup Foundation, a new business accelerator for experienced business professionals who want to quit their day job and launch their first venture without the sort of risk that most assume is synonymous with the startup lifestyle. He particularly likes to work with people who might have a mortgage, they might have kids, and they aren't in a position to take big risks. They don't have access to that fabled capital, those bucket loads of cash, or high-level industry contacts, or specialist technical skills. They don't have all that stuff. They simply have a desire to start something new. Dan, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, James.
Let me ask you, to kick things off, why are you so passionate about this topic?
James, back in 2004 when I made the leap of faith myself, the challenge of making that transition from corporate to entrepreneurship.
Which we all do at one point or another.
It was scary.
Terrifying.
I have to say, I had no idea of what I was doing. I knew I had a calling to do an entrepreneurial project for myself, but I lacked the resources, I lacked the connections, the credibility in order to make it succeed.
Because I remember when I started out, I looked around me and it almost looked like there was this void for people who were willing and able to help me. Was that the case with you?
Exactly.
So you started this new business accelerator, a bunch with some other really clever people, and today we're going to talk about 5 things to get right before you quit your day job. Now, the first topic that I have for our discussion today is get your life right to get your money right. What do you mean by that, Dan?
Well, if you don't get your spouse to, if you don't share your idea with your spouse and get buy-in from that emotionally, or I say spouse, but it could be partner, life partner, one of the things you'll find is a disconnect between what you're trying to achieve and what's happening at home.
Yeah, and the thing is, these are the people who are the most important people in your life, which is why you're doing this. You're not doing it for industry fame and all this other stuff and bucket loads of cash. You might, but more likely you're doing it because you want to create a better life for the people who you love.
Absolutely. And if you don't get that buy-in, I think that's probably the biggest unsung reason why many startups actually fail.
And what I find really funny is that just because we've been dreaming about our ideas for years and years and we're very passionate about these ideas, we haven't talking about them a lot to our family. We assume that everybody's on the same page. We assume that we've got buy-in, but often your partner doesn't actually believe that you're ever going to do it, and perhaps even is quietly hoping that you never will.
Sure, but getting that buy-in from your partner is in fact one of the most important types of guidance that you can actually get, and yet if you don't achieve that, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Because if you're not going to get an honest perspective from your partner or your spouse or your kids or your granny or whoever's important to you, you're not going to get an honest perspective from anyone, are you?
Absolutely.
Now, there are some times where they turn around and they say, I respect that you're passionate, but I don't think this is right and I don't think you should pursue this venture. And they put the kibosh on it, but we're going to deal with that a little bit later, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
We're going to talk about stop-loss strategies.
We've got some great action points that will help you solve those or address those issues.
So speaking of actions, for this first point, get your life right to get your money right. So what we want you to do is write down your idea on one piece of paper and set time to talk it through with your significant other. Is that right?
Absolutely. If you can't describe in one page what it is that you're trying to do and who it is that you're trying to help, and then what the outcome is for your family, then how can you expect your partner to possibly buy into that vision?
Yeah, and the other thing is, this is not just mentioning it while washing the dishes one evening, it's setting aside the time.
Absolutely. Exactly the same importance as you would get to at New Year's Eve when you're making New Year's resolutions together and you're sharing your goals and your vision and your dreams about where you want to go. This is that critical to do.
So there's your action. Write something down and set aside the time to talk about it. Honest, open dialogue. For our second point, and I love that you've brought this up, be loud and proud. What do you mean when you say be loud and proud, Dan?
Well, again, one of the things that I think is really important is guidance, and getting that perspective from different people about whether your idea is a boat that will actually float is really critical. And I think you actually need to take your idea and share it with people in order to determine whether that idea actually has some merit.
Which is the opposite of what most people do. They don't tell anyone about it.
That's right. They wrap their idea up and package it up for fear that someone might steal it, when in fact you actually openly need to share it to engage people, let them see your passion and engage them with it.
Because most people, they think that as well too. They often think that they're protecting their idea. I won't tell anyone about it because I'm protecting my idea. But what I've found is that most people are actually protecting their psyche. They're protecting themselves because they're just quite secretly afraid that everyone's going to tell them that their idea stinks, so they don't tell anyone.
I think it does come back to that sense of fear too, the fear that I'll be ridiculed if I table my idea and it turns out to be a terrible idea, and I don't want to necessarily be ridiculed by my people that I consider important in my life.
But the irony, of course, is that you need to find out if it's a bad idea very, very early.
How do you test that idea unless you share it, unless you articulate that in a way that people can understand very clearly and that they can look at it and say, hey, great idea, but I've got some expertise in this area. What if you did X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, and the worst case scenario is that you bring it up, you share your idea, and then someone points out why it's never going to work, and you've just saved yourself several years of hardship or another 5 years of dreaming for something that was never going to fly anyway.
Or worse, James, if in fact you make a start on it and then it fails, and suddenly all of the risks around career and reputation and your spouse, and suddenly you're under pressure at home, the opportunity cost of the money that you didn't earn, there are a whole lot of implications that you should have dealt with that you didn't.
So talking is just another form of research. It's just another form of due diligence. The more perspectives that you can get, the better idea you've got whether it's going to be any good or not.
Absolutely. You've really got to seek out those people that can give you that form of guidance, the people that say yes but, people who've got deep domain knowledge, people who are where you want to be or where you're aspiring to reach out to.
So for an action, obviously we want to share the idea that we've got. How can we turn that into an action that listeners can follow and do, say, in the next 24 to 48 hours?
James, I think the answer there is to find 3 people that you respect and trust, perhaps that you maybe don't know well but you look up to or aspire to be like, and test the idea with them, buy them a cup of coffee or perhaps lunch, and sit down and then listen and take notes.
I remember I did that, and I chose 5, and I chose 5 people that I thought would be perhaps good allies later on. They were just people from my local network, but what I discovered was that 2 of them thought it was a terrible idea, my first business. 3 of them thought it was a pretty good idea, and 1 of them ended up coming on to invest in it. So it wasn't a bad idea also from a longer term investment point of view.
Not at all. And there's another important thing that you'll get from sharing that idea is that when you share it, the idea grows.
Yeah.
You get perspectives that you hadn't thought about, and you get introductions or collaborations that you never thought possible.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Imagination is almost entirely determined by experience. So the moment that we bring in all these other people with these imaginations, suddenly the idea grows. I love that you said that. Watch the idea grow. Introduce new perspectives and watch the idea grow. Speaking of idea evaluation, you mentioned finding people with deep domain experience. How do we go about doing something like that?
Well, one of the great things about experienced professionals is that they've often been circling around a problem for many, many years, or they've got a lot of perspective about how a market works and what the challenges and needs of the people in that market are, or the users. And so by getting some deep domain experience as a perspective, you can actually start refining and getting down to a knife edge about what is the real problem that your challenge solves.
And these guys have probably seen other similar ventures launch and fail before. They probably know where the dark hidden obstacles are, the challenges, the unseen challenges.
I think you're right, and often they'll have seen other people try and take different approaches, and how maybe even in corporations that have tried to address that with some innovation, and other entrepreneurs, and they've seen what works and what hasn't worked.
And the people with the deep domain experience, they're often the first advocates if it goes well, if they're inspired by it, and they've usually got the connections that you don't have.
Wow, there's some interesting thoughts around that too, is that you're in fact one degree of separation from all of the people that you actually need to succeed. And so by getting that buy-in from the people who've got that domain experience, they've also got the connections, you're very, very close. You're certainly one step closer to getting to the point of success that you're at.
So these people can become evangelists for you on your behalf. So instead of you doing all the legwork, you can empower some of these deep domain experts to help do your marketing for you.
They do, and they certainly would add a level of credibility and respectability that you, as perhaps somebody either from outside the space, may take years to get.
It's interesting, I was talking to someone about raising capital, and they were talking about the sorts of things that needed to be on an early stage business plan, and the first thing that they said was get people from your industry on your business plan as advisors or backers or just mentors, because they lend credibility to what it is that you have that you might not necessarily have yourself.
Yeah, you certainly should find some people on your team that understand what the problems are that you're trying to solve.
So how can we go out and find some of these people with deep domain experience?
Well, I mentioned that they're one degree of separation away from you, so I think the opportunity is to how to find them. And one of the ways that I've done that in the past is made a list of all of the different people that I would like to get that to help solve the problem. And for instance, in entrepreneurship, I made a list which included Richard Branson. Now, I don't know Richard Branson, I don't know anyone that does, so I thought to myself, well, okay, who do I know that would make a great alternative to Richard Branson that helps me get closer to where it is I'm trying to get to.
Someone who's more accessible. Because you write down Richard Branson, he's not available, he's a busy guy. And then who have got the traits of that particular person who would work well in my venture, someone who's local and is more accessible to me and my network.
Indeed. And so I ended up with about 9 people on that list who fitted the profile of where it was that I wanted to go, without even realising that consciously realising that I knew these people.
Right, yeah, they were already part of your network. You might not have just known that they existed.
Some of them were people that I'd had conversations with on the phone, some that I'd met for coffee or were on my email list, some through social media connections, and others that I was introduced to or that had common connections with. It's
like when you're buying or selling a house. Until that point, you don't notice how many for sale signs there are up around. And the moment that you're buying a house, they seem to be everywhere. When you isolate and fixate on the goal that you want, such as how to surround myself with all the right people, suddenly they're popping up left, right and centre, aren't they?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and then of course we can help this out by also going to meetups, networking events and other shindigs and soirees that are also likely to attract these people.
It's a wonderful way to meet people, and in fact getting out and having those 50 coffees a month is a really wonderful way to connect with people and actually share with them and learn from them.
I'll tell you what, I don't think any great leap forward ever happens by staring at an Excel spreadsheet, which is where a lot of entrepreneurs start. The great leap forwards come from going to that networking event, swapping a business card with someone and getting a new perspective. I
would absolutely agree, and I think a lot of the mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make is that they spend 6 or 12 or 18 months researching on the internet, quote unquote. You can see my fingers here. The thing about research is that you should only do it for no more than a month. If you can't find out what you need to do in a month, then you probably there's a greater underlying issue there, and it probably comes back to the fear factor. Yeah,
it's a form of procrastination. My first venture, 9 to 11 months of research, and I still have the folder. It's a joke because it's downloaded and printed pages from the internet and all sorts of stuff, which became meaningless the moment that I launched.
I remember my first entrepreneurial project, and the business plan that I put together took me 6 months, and it was well over 200 pages. I'm sure that's how we did things back then, but now most of my projects are down to 1 page. If I can't describe it in 1 page, then it probably isn't a valid idea.
There's a smart guy in Melbourne called Scott Hansacker, and he says if you're not slightly embarrassed about your idea when you launch, you're too late. I think that's what he says. Or if you're not slightly embarrassed when you start talking about it, you've left it too late.
Yeah, Scott's a good friend of mine, and I agree wholeheartedly with that idea.
That's a good one. So we've looked at the idea of introducing the idea to the important people in your life, because you're going to need to get that buy-in before you can take anything any further. Then it's about being loud and being proud and sharing it with some mates and talking to some people. Then it's about going a little bit deeper and looking at idea evaluation, and that's getting people with deep domain experience. There are always that fear that someone's going to steal my idea. And I don't know about you, Dan, but I've been, writing, living this space for about 10 years. It does happen, but it is just so insignificantly, statistically speaking, rare that it seems to be barely a threat at all of someone stealing your idea. Sure, it does happen, but I could probably count on one hand the number of times I've seen it happen in my inner circle and broader circle.
I agree. I think out of the 400 ideas that I've had over the life of my career, I think I've probably had 2 of them pinched, if you will. It's a lot rarer than you imagine.
And the thing is, when you say pinched, it was probably because you were sitting on it for way too long, or you weren't taking advantage of it, or whatever it is, or your business partner decided to continue pursuing it while you were busy off doing some other thing. It's pinching is a funny word, isn't it?
Well, indeed, but I think ideas are an interesting ethereal concept where I don't think one person is necessarily working on a single idea around the world. I think that you might find right throughout history the advent of people that were working on, for instance, the telephone or on television or on wonderful ideas that changed history, but they're working completely in isolation of each other on the similar concepts at the same time. So the way I look at it is that if I don't develop this idea, somebody else will. They won't necessarily steal it from me. What they will, however, do is they will succeed in getting it to market where I might fail.
Because ideas are ideas, execution and implementation is what's key.
Critical.
So speaking of that, let's move on to the 4th point. Setting goals and preparing a roadmap. Where does someone want to start when they've gone through this phase of talking with other people? Now it's time to write something down on a piece of paper and take some actions. Where would we begin if we want to start with something like a roadmap or a mind map?
Well, I actually think you start with your destination, because you're thinking about where it is that I actually want to end up. So imagining your destination and then reverse engineering it, a little bit like you do with a journey or a trip to go from where I am now to where I want to get to, and then thinking about the waypoints that you'll have to transition through in order to get there and how long it will take for each waypoint and what resources you're going to need to get there. So I think it's a little bit like taking a journey or a trip.
Yeah, and we start with the end in mind, so we can imagine forward and see where we want to be, and then it's the steps that we're going to take to get to that point. So we can draw 2 little circles at each end of a big long line, and then add a number of little stepping stones between the 2.
And the journey might not be exactly as you imagine, but it'll certainly take you through many of those waypoints. And having a good sense of where it is that you're trying to get to will help you to determine what the stepping stones are.
I think people as well too from a corporate background tend to freak out and think that it's more complex than it really is. So what they do is they start to do step 5, introduce social media amplification strategy, right? And then no one knows what that means and we don't know what it's about. Whereas step 5 might be something more along the lines of start a Facebook profile, which is a more actionable step than these big wanky words that we use in a corporate setting. We need to really break down this mind map into steps that we know how to do and can understand.
And from my experience, I actually think it's a fairly simple process. Like there are about 5 main steps that you actually go through.
Right. We're going to draw a little mind map on a board to show you what this might look like. I'm going to take a photo of it and you'll see it on the screen just about now. But what you'll notice is that there are different steps along the way, and then there might be other adjacent little journeys, mini journeys along the way as you take each step on the mind map as we delve into things in a little bit more detail.
I think that's a great thing. Often as we develop an action plan, we're worried about the steps that we have to do way down the road, when in fact we really should just be focusing on the most key important points that we need to do at this phase of the journey. And not be thinking too far ahead and getting into all the nitty-gritty and the detail. If we can just focus in the moment now on the things that are most important, that are going to make the difference to this stage of the journey, I think it'll bear a lot of fruit later.
And it also helps when you're wanting to just get started, when you've got step one, you know what to focus on. Like a cooking a cake, they start with step one, heat the oven, you know.
It's almost like a recipe, and if you can just concentrate on the things that are important now, and the recipe example is a good one, James, you can prepare the best cake, but if you forgot to put the oven on 10 minutes beforehand and put the cake in, what's going to happen to it when it comes out?
Yeah, and we can simplify things by saying step one, turn on the oven, step two, sift the flour. That's where we want to go. Now, a little bit earlier, we talked about getting buy-in from your loved ones and your family, and we used the expression go and no-go points. I heard you use a little bit earlier when we were chatting, I think it's a stockbroking expression, a stop-loss strategy. What are we talking about here?
Well, in any journey, there are milestones that we have to achieve in order to go on to the next section. And the example of the share market one is a very, very good one. If we were to buy shares in a particular company at, let's say, $10, and we might recognise that if those shares were to drop below a certain point, we might want to exit out of them. Let's say if they fall below $6, we should sell them because there's a reason why. And alternatively, if they go above $20, maybe we want to sell them because we want to take our profits and put in some protection strategies there. And having a go, no-go points mapped out as part of your roadmap is really, really critical.
Because this helps when you're talking to family members and everybody else, because you can set these points, like, you know, at what point will you quit your day job and work on this full time? In that way you can minimize the risk, and then suddenly your spouse is not assuming that you're just going to quit your day job tomorrow. There's a point where you're going to have a bit of security before you're going to make that big leap. Now, you've got some ideas. What are some common go, no-go points?
Well, I'm happy to share that, but I also think it's important to recognise that it's about also helping keep you accountable to what it is that you're trying to achieve, and being accountable to somebody, and especially if it's your life partner, for achieving those outcomes is really critical.
And everybody needs a boss. Why not make it the people who we love the most?
Absolutely, because they've got your best interests at heart.
So what are some of the go, no-go points for, say, quitting your day job?
Well, one of the things is at some point after you launch, you may be building this thing part-time, and so there's a point at which it's then generating some money. So a great no-go point that we talk about is when you make the transition or the leap from part-time to full-time. Now, obviously, as an experienced professional, you've got risks and potentially a mortgage, definitely spouse, maybe kids and lifestyle obligations, and maybe some career opportunity challenges too. If your mortgage isn't being paid, that creates a whole set of issues. So having a stop-loss strategy around when you make the leap from part-time to full-time and how much revenue that the business is generating and therefore would be able to pay you is a really great one.
So something like if it's generating enough revenue to pay half your salary or something like that.
That's a wonderful, wonderful milestone. It can be higher or lower than that, but I think actually having that as a point is a really good one.
You also mentioned as a stop loss having a profile beyond the job. What did you mean by that?
James, that's an easy one. I think as you're developing your idea, it's useful to develop a profile beyond yourself that talks about where it is that you want to go. And so for me, for instance, I'm that startup guy. And so that is about highlighting to other people in the industry that I've got some expertise, or I'm that a person of influence in terms of startups.
And I've seen this happen again and again where someone might be working within an industry. They set up a blog and a Facebook profile which might be that startup guy or the person who's an expert on apps. I don't know, I'm thinking of these other names. And they start with a blog and maybe some social media profiles, they get some followers, and then before you know it, people are actually asking them to partner with them in all sorts of different ventures which focus on their area of passion and expertise, which makes it so much easier to quit the day job because it just suddenly feels less scary because people want to do things with you.
Well, there's two important reasons for it. Number one, it positions you as the person that you can have conversations with other people about your topic of interest. But secondly, more importantly, it also differentiates you as a professional and your company life, the profile that you have there, from who you are as an experienced professional but not part of your day job.
So let's bring this back to the first point when we talking about your ideas with the people that you love. You've worked through these 5 points to some degree, I hope, at least in your head. But this first point, when you're speaking to the people that you love, you obviously want to have an idea of what the business is going to be about. But it's worthwhile at this point to also write down some of those milestones, the go, no-go milestones, just as a place to start that conversation with the other people in your life, so that when you bring this up with them, you're not saying, I want to quit my job tomorrow. You're demonstrating that you've thought out the steps that you're going to take before you want to achieve that outcome.
Well, and it's not just thinking through the steps, but it's also taking into consideration their thoughts, their feelings and their needs and their perspectives. So negotiating those go, no-go points together is a great way of communicating the expectations of what you're using this for.
And it's a great way to end as well too, because we began on the topic of fear. And what you realise is as you work through this process, fear is not to do with, it's not something that we hold in isolation. It's something that's intrinsically tied to our relationships with the people around us. We fear that they're going to ridicule us, or we fear that we're going to let our loved ones down, or we fear that we're going to put everyone in a position of hardship. By bringing on our friends and family and introducing everyone around us to these concepts, we're also at risk of introducing fear to them. But by working through this process, we can reduce their fear, improve the education, improve the dialogue, improve the transparency, and start the process of making things happen.
Well, and in fact, you're absolutely right. And the opposite of fear is in fact love. And if we're able to be honest enough with ourselves and actually say, I love my partner enough to share with her my innermost aspirations and desires and sense of possible achievement, and I love her enough that I'm prepared to harbour or address any challenges that might come up as a result of that conversation. So instead of fear, if we move into an area of abundance and love, I think we might be surprised just how much support we might actually be able to get.
What a wonderful way to end this. I want you to think about the other people in your life, whether it's your husband, whether it's your wife, whether it's your kids, whether it's your dog Fifi, whether it's your grandmother, or whether it's your close mates. The people that you love, think about them, think about your ambitions, and think about what you can do. Ditch that fear and take the first step by following the formula that we talked about today. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, James. It's been my absolute pleasure.